The biblical figure who is most meaningful to me in this stage of my life is the unnamed woman who washed Jesus' feet with her tears, from Luke chapter 7, verses 36 through 50. The story begins with a Pharisee asking Jesus to eat with him at the Pharisee's home. After Jesus is seated at the table, a woman approaches him with a jar of expensive ointment. I used to wonder how this woman showed up at the dinner. The host, who refers to her only as a sinner, certainly does not seem to have invited her. My understanding is that such meals took place outside, and that other people from the community could come and listen to the conversation and learn from the teacher or respected guest. The host probably encouraged this situation, as it no doubt elevated his social status to have everyone know that the hottest teacher in town was dining at his table. But this woman clearly has a plan beyond just listening to Jesus. She's brought with her this expensive gift, the ointment in an alabaster jar. The Bible tells us, "She stood behind him at his feet, weeping, and began to bathe his feet with her tears and to dry them with her hair. Then she continued kissing his feet and anointing them with the ointment." I find that an absolute vivid and shocking image. Crying so much that you could bathe someone's feet with your tears and then drying those feet with your hair. The sheer physical nature of this encounter is astounding. What it says to me is that this woman was desperate. She wanted Jesus to forgive her sins. We never learn what her sins are, although we can probably guess what this Pharisee would consider to be a sin from a woman who seems to be alone, without protection from family or a husband. Jesus also agrees that her sins are many. Yet when he sees the Pharisee giving him what was surely a bit of side-eye about allowing such a sinful woman to touch him, he goes on to tell a story about two debtors whose debt was forgiven when they could not pay. He asked the Pharisee, whose name is Simon, who loved the creditor more, the one whose debt was larger or the one who had a smaller debt forgiven? Simon answers, of course, "I suppose the one for whom he canceled the greater debt." Jesus tells him he is right, but he doesn't stop there. He goes on to explicitly compare Simon to the woman at his feet and to make it very clear that Simon does not come out on top. Jesus says, "Do you see this woman? I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet, but she has bathed my feet with her tears and dried them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but from the time I came in, she has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with ointment. Therefore, I tell you, her sins, which were many, have been forgiven. Hence, she has shown great love. But the one to whom little is forgiven loves little." This story has many layers. One of these layers is hospitality. Simon should have been hospitable. He was the host, but he had not even shown Jesus the bare minimum of welcome. The woman, on the other hand, is extravagant with her hospitality. This interaction between this woman and Jesus is intense human connection, not superficial politeness. That is hospitality. Another layer to the story is social status. As a Pharisee, Simon had a high social status. He probably thought he was doing Jesus a favor by inviting him to eat at his home. It also seemed to be yet another test to see if Jesus were a true prophet. And Jesus, allowing himself to be touched by this sinful woman of low social status, was failing the test. To the Pharisee, the only explanation for Jesus allowing this sinful woman to touch him and therefore make him unclean was that Jesus did not know she was sinful, and therefore Jesus wasn't a prophet after all. Of course, Jesus goes on to explain that he knew exactly who she was and what her sins were, and goes on to turn everyone's expectations upside down, as he so often did, by saying that she was the one who showed him hospitality, that she was the one who loved him best. Surely she could hardly have dreamed of such a response. The woman was certainly aware of her own low social status. Though her actions demonstrated humility, she quite literally throws herself at his feet. They also required boldness. It was truly courageous of her to do what she did. I have wondered if Jesus thought about this woman when he washed the feet of his disciples in John 13, and then told them to do the same for each other and for other people. I don't know what made her so desperate to be forgiven, so bold as to place herself at Jesus' feet. We only know the result: forgiveness and love. A few times in my life, I have felt that kind of desperation to throw myself at Jesus' feet. One time was quite recent when my husband collapsed and required emergency surgery. The surgeons were not hopeful about his chances for recovery. Many of you joined us in prayer for him, for which I am so grateful. As my boys and I prayed in the waiting room, along with Carla, those long hours of his surgery, it felt as if we were throwing ourselves on God's mercy. We were desperate, so we also became bold, and God answered our prayers. Prayers of desperation like mine, like those of the woman with the ointment, teach us to turn to God in all things. Richard Foster writes in his book, Prayer, that God so loves us, that God delights in our asking. God is so pleased when we finally turn even a little toward God. God longs to hear from us about the smallest matters of our lives. I pray that today you experience the boldness and extravagance of God's love.